Hi, I'm Aaron Fethian, the host of Data Matters, the podcast for data leaders and anyone interested in data. Whether it's team challenges, technology challenges, the changing world of AI, this podcast is for you.
Hello, Julian, and welcome to the show. It's so awesome to have you in person, our first event where we're actually recording. Lovely studio. So pleased to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
It's amazing to be here. Thanks so much, Aaron. And yeah, this place looks incredible.
Yeah, it's really different in person, isn't it? There's we were chatting earlier about just, the kind of stuff that happens, to coming into the office, about what it's like, actually working, where the expectation is to come in now. And, I think that's probably where I'd like to begin. If you could tell us a little bit about you and your company you work for, and just frame it for our audience. What's your typical day like?
Sure. Well, my background is in engineering, a software engineer. Coming from Argentina. All my life, I work in data industry. I started with databases, a bit of reporting, BI, analytics, and more recently, 10 years, mostly cloud computing, data engineering. And now, well, I guess we need to shift our career again now with all this AI boom and stuff.
Yeah, for sure. It's a massive time of change. It probably has always been, but this feels like a big leap. Thinking back then, all that time in your career, was there a moment that stood out as data that this is for me? I absolutely love this.
Yes, for sure. I think it was in university. We had like all sorts of subjects, and I was never much into like actual creating websites or software engineering per se. But as soon as we started to like digging into databases and analytics, I knew that was it.
So more the data than like a lot of people say, the kind of connection with the organization. But for you, it was like the algorithms then, or?
To me, it was the structure in data, and there are things that I could analyze and see. And it was mostly driven by the technology, I think, as well at the time. Big data was becoming a buzzword every now and then. And you had to go really complex with, Hadoop or Spark at the time, creating your MapReduce jobs. And so just to do like a small aggregation, like a row count of a different set of dimensions. But the challenge was billions and billions of rows, which we didn't have the capabilities back then.
Yeah.
So that there was also a professor at uni that he was passionate as well, and the way he was teaching the subject. I think the combination of those two things really, really helped me drive my career towards something I really, really liked doing.
Yeah. And so that experience working on huge data sets, not everyone gets to do that. Like, is that now like your day job? You get that kind of scale of data?
Yes, it depends. But I think now it's not much of a bottleneck anymore because most of these managed services, they can process billions of rows with little to no effort, right?
Yeah.
We're used to like a few seconds or milliseconds response time to analyze billions of rows, and then that's it. You don't have to configure your own infrastructure. You don't have to configure anything really. Perhaps a few clicks and you have a proof of concept done, and you can focus perhaps a bit more on the business side rather than the tech side. Yeah, I think progressively, engineers, tech leads, and so on will need to be closer to the product, to the business, because technology won't be a challenge anymore, at least for the kind of problems that we're solving right now with like normal enterprises.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's kind of incredible. Like you said, the challenge used to be all this infrastructure to do something relatively simple. And now with AI and great infrastructure, you're really struggling to put it to, always to use, because there's so much power there in both speed of delivery, but also speed of, executing. Fascinating time. And I think you're right. Probably the shift has to be more towards business value, which has got to be a good thing. All right. So if you cast your mind back to, your career and the things that, really drew you into data, you said, you kind of drawn to the technology. I wonder if there's a time that stood out as something that went really well, or something that you regret, or an issue. Like, is there something that kind of stands out to you as an experience you'd love to share with everyone?
Good question. A pivotal career. Yes, I do. I think earlier on in my career, I realized that my manager is not responsible, or any manager is not responsible of being your career coach. Neither the company you work for they're not responsible for your career growth either. So I learned that I had to look somewhere else, to uplift my career. And this particular moment was around perhaps 2016. I was working in a company at the time, and cloud computing was coming out. AWS was perhaps the key player, and Google Cloud Platform was starting to eat the market a little bit. And I knew it was coming, not to go anywhere, but to be the new industry standard. So I knew we had to pivot our careers towards the cloud. But there was an issue. The company I was working for, they didn't trust with their data to the cloud. So I knew I had to look elsewhere. So through friends, a friend of a friend, they had a startup and they had a particular need. They needed to analyze some data by creating a real-time pipeline in Google Cloud. I was like, bingo, this is, I'm going to help you. Like, oh, cool, do you have experience? No, but I'll make it happen. Trusted my skills, my background in engineering and so on, and said, give me 1 month, I'll deliver it. And that's how I did my first, perhaps, contract or a side gig, but a professional experience on the market. And I ended up creating this Dataflow PubSub real-time pipeline. Yeah, I was very proud of it. But I think the takeaway is I used that particular experience to go out there in the market and now say, look, I have professional experience in Google Cloud. I can apply to the job role that you're advertising, which is cloud engineer. So yeah, to me, that was my pivotal moment.
They really dug into technology and gained some experience firsthand. It sounds like you then moved on from that role and you went and sought out this kind of challenge. There's always a hesitation, I find, like a company thinking they're doing something in their own spare time. I've always found that to be massively productive, because you investigated the whole thing. There's clearly was an industry trend which they will benefit from. I wonder if, going back, what advice would you give that company instead of the fear of the cloud? Like, how could they have done something different, or you're encouraged if that?
Interesting. Depends on the industry. Like we can't give like advice to every company the same way, but there are certain industries that they want to let the waters to settle to see who are the winners in the market and then go with them once this like secure, trustworthy and so on. This was an insurance perhaps closer to the banking sector. So certainly they
risk averse.
Exactly. Yeah. They had their own servers, their own mainframes, and they own the data physically. So yes, then there was a big push not to do it.
Yeah. Interesting challenge for that kind of organization. It's a long time in banking and the industry around fintech, and there's a lot of narrative around if you don't keep up, if you don't innovate, and at a level they all appreciate that, but then the reality is still there that they're a risk-driven company. There's real threats to their business if they get something with their data wrong.
And let me tell you a story actually from what you mentioned. I call it the entrepreneurship spirit. Like trying to do something outside your working hours, still related to the field, or perhaps within the company, but something that your manager didn't ask to do. I think it's really important. I personally love it. And when I interview people, I try to find out to see, will they go the extra mile? Are they curious? Can you see this entrepreneurial spirit that will bring you to the next level in terms of waves of new technologies, practices, and so on? I think that makes the big difference, because if you are just a new contributor, you're waiting for a manager to tell you what to do all the time.
It's just not definitely not the path to success. I think I totally agree. Like I also look out for that kind of are they a self-starter? Are they looking innovative? Are they looking for things? And it strikes me that actually with AI, that's the skill gap that everyone talks about. They actually like knowing what to do, then instructing how to do it, like actually doing it now is so much more productive than it's ever been. But you can't necessarily have a person that thinks that way to figure out what to do. I wonder if how do you see AI adoption in your team, and like how are you experiencing it?
I told my team, this is a non-negotiable thing. We need to learn it, we need to adapt, and we need to embrace it. Take the time you need, but it's not going to be a question of whether we can use it or not. It's here to stay, and it's going to become the industry standard. I don't think AI agents will end up replacing engineers, but perhaps the engineer might be replaced by another engineer who uses the AI, right?
Yeah, I definitely see that as well. And it's really, I get this conversation quite a lot, and it's really hard to sort of pinpoint Yeah, I see some engineers reluctant to take on AI as a assistant to their work. That's a puzzle to me. Like, why? It's clearly great at producing certain kinds of output, just as an assistant. So almost like, why the reluctance to use it? And so, do you see that in your team? Like, do you have a spectrum of people who are like really ready to adopt it, and others who are not quite there yet?
That's a bit of everything. Yes. Perhaps it brings me back to the software engineering ego, perhaps, where it's the code they produce, and they're very proud of it, and they want to babysit it, they want to keep maintaining it, they want other people to perhaps
Appreciate it.
appreciate it or change it in any way. And I think with AI, I feel that they are being invaded by the way that the code is produced, not by themselves, but perhaps by not being able to delegate a little bit more.
Yeah, that's actually a fascinating point of view. It's feels like then it's more like an identity threat to their value. Was this amazing, beautiful code, and suddenly like a machine can produce it? So where's me gone? In their head. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, Julian, this is the part of the show that gets a bit nervy for you. We're going to ask you a question that you've never heard before, from our experience and things that are going on. And this comes from a conversation. Was at an event, and one of the speakers on the stage from a smaller company. Part of their presentation was that AI doesn't need a semantic layer. The data doesn't need a semantic layer, and this had quite a reaction, which is why I'm actually asking you. If you think about like AI as a assistant to producing analytics, do you think a semantic layer is necessary to achieve that outcome?
Wow, good question. Does AI need a semantic layer? I think it depends when. Today, I think it does. In 2 years, maybe not. And why am I saying this? I recently read this article from DBT where they basically were evaluating the accuracy of the response of AI agents for doing analytics engineering with and without the semantic layer. The percentages, the response was really, really, really high 90s% with the semantic layer. But without the semantic layer, it was around the 17%. To me, the way I interpret it is, let's throw more compute into this problem. So if you can get 70% right, no semantic layer with not too much context, perhaps it's just a matter of time until the amount of tokens that it uses goes down, or the amount of thinking that it does, it goes higher, or in 2-3 years' time, when the GPUs go twice as fast, then the amount of compute goes significantly faster. I think it's a matter of time. So like we did before, throwing more infrastructure into problems we couldn't really solve from a code, that solved it at time. I think similarly now it's important to have that semantic layer, but perhaps in a few years, maybe not super necessary. So I think the politically correct question is yes, let's do it in the semantic layer.
I think that was what was quite shocking to the audience. And maybe it was designed to shock that there was actually more of an attack on the semantic layer vendors. And your position is quite insightful. So anyone who's been in technology and software and for any length of time has seen the progression of CPU and compute, seen the progression of networks and cloud storage, and that capacity isn't really our problem tomorrow, next year, a few years' time. It is. Everyone is quite worried today. There's acquisitions and there's company valuations that are skyrocketing because this is just a very finite resource that everyone's trying to make use of. And I think that a way I was thinking as you were talking that through, there's like a context that's built up in a conversation. But there's almost like a infrastructure context that could be built up through how the questions are being asked, and maybe the efficiency comes from a kind of almost like a self-building on the semantic layer, because that's all we're really doing in models anyway.
I totally agree. I'm also seeing perhaps a similar shift when it comes to running local models. We all get excited with the latest model every month coming up. Oh, now Anthropic, now GPT, but there's a race as well for running local models. And there's a big appetite as well for different companies that might have different requirements from a security perspective and so on. They might want to run things locally, are open source. So I've been playing around running Chinese models that are open source on a local laptop. They are good, but they're not as good as what we are used to using the APIs. But what I'm saying is that perhaps with the local capacities that we have in our laptops, we are perhaps a couple of years behind to what perhaps GPT-2 was a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
So that the token generation, the word next to word, might take a little bit longer to generate when you're running locally. But if you extrapolate that in a couple of years' time, what we see, and we are amazed with the launches at the moment, we will have that capability locally.
Yeah, that's interesting. You're already seeing the progression. Yeah, that I think in the past was quite hard for a person to see over the length of time that it was happening. With AI happening so fast, actually, watching can see it. There was this very popular list of LLMs, published at some point. And the author of the list actually had to stop when it got more than kind of 16,000 different models. And there are just so many models. And you see like these specialized choosing the type of model for different tasks. That's a crazy space. It's not quite software. It's not quite data. The other thing that kind of gets me excited is the edge data kind of challenge. It's like you've got a model running locally, but actually having the data running locally perhaps is a way to get rid of the kind of token problem, networking problem in that. So there's the future that's quite different, I think. What does today look like for you? Like if you think, that's kind of like future, practically, how are engineers using it today? And I kind of wonder what advice you'd give them to do it differently. You're either in the current thinking or what might be happening next, if you had some advice on this.
What's working really well for us at the moment, and I can see it, is a few things. We are perhaps starting to become more productive in a way of amount of code being pushed. Now, that doesn't necessarily means that the code that we push is as good as it was when we were doing it manually. But there are a few elements that are identified that the AI is super useful for us. The first one is tech debt. Addressing tech debt has always been a constant hurdle with the business. Why do we need to spend this many weeks on this? We won't see any difference. But we are the engineers that actually, end up getting a call when something breaks. So we know it's not stable. We know we need to work on it. So yes, being able to address the tech debt in ways we weren't able to do that before is helping us a lot. Another thing is writing tests. I think the industry in software development engineering, we all see the benefits, and we all claim that test-driven development is perhaps the way to do our work. But in reality, we know that that's not the case. It's a process that takes a lot of effort, perhaps twice or three times the amount of effort, and a lot of way more code, perhaps to fake or to mock the behavior that you desire. And we ended up not doing it in the industry. But with agents, I think now is a good time. The agents are really good at going through, crawling every single use case and edge case, right? So that's what they're really good at least I'm finding it. So using the agents to review your code or evaluate all the possible scenarios to make it like a stronger, more reliable. I think that's working really well. And also, test is a little bit boring to run. And finally, another perhaps boring task within data engineering to me, I find is data governance. About it, but a technical person, they don't want to go digging into writing documents and analyzing permissions or checking column lineage fields that have the same tag or different names. I think it's a task that requires, it takes a lot of effort, a lot of time, and it's not super rewarding. We can see the value, that's for sure, in data governance, but I think agents, they're not writing tests. I think the agents helping us out, drawing the data governance, it won't be perfect, but I believe that if they can help us to get 70% there, that's amazing. Then you end up doing the 30% with very minimal effort or perhaps, that's all you need.
So anyone who's worked for me, he knows me. I've always had a very strong emphasis on the testing and asserting what you think your part of the software is doing. And I definitely have seen the motive to do it. Often, like you said, they work perhaps, or they can't see the benefit yet because it's the future then that they're sort of protecting against or the scenarios that they've not envisaged. Do you still wonder whether, even though they see the benefit, even though it's easy, still thinking like that is still a bit of a challenge? You're actually getting the AI to do that piece of work. There's no one without the experience, knowing that's what they should, that's the difference between someone who's using AI quite well or someone who's an engineer who's building software quite well. I wonder how we solve that as an industry to still get the appreciation and do these sort of more mundane tasks, even though they're easier. It doesn't mean that we all do them.
Totally. And I think that the biggest leverage that engineer can have is context that the agent won't have. Yeah, because meetings that you went, context in the market that you perceive, but it's not documented, it's not written. And I think that's one of the main leverages that engineers should use with lots of thinking on what code should I write that the agent cannot know.
Yeah. Okay, so we've coming to the last segment of the episode, and we've talked a lot about what the industry's doing well and what's changing the way that we work. This part, we're going to close with a question from another guest, and you're getting a chance to ask the question to the next guest. But before we do that, I wonder if there's something that you see that we're doing completely wrong as an industry that you advise, everyone that was listening to change.
Wow, what's the industry doing completely wrong? You always need to look at the motivations, right? The industry is always following the money, but not necessarily the good practices. So I see in the industry in these events that there's so many low-code tools that promise that everyone can build a data pipeline, which is great. They've lowered the entry barrier so low that anyone can do it. But then you have a few side effects, like you get vendor locked in, then the bill keeps creeping up and then you don't know where else to look. But also, effectively, you're digging your own cave and you're getting tech debt effectively. And with this, you have a team perhaps creating data pipelines that are super important and critical for the business, but without much engineering background. And what I've seen in teams, in large companies as well, I've seen teams that perhaps don't use version control. They don't write unit tests on the SQL. They even use the personal credentials or raw keys within the scripts or code they push. And I think this is really important for the industry, because why are we allowing this to happen in the data industry and not in other engineering industries like software engineering or civil engineering, for example?
Yeah.
And I think that data is as important as the rest. But as we were discussing before, data has always been a bit behind in terms of good practices. So I think it's about time to bring back engineering into data.
Yeah. Do you know what? I absolutely love this. And we chatted before recording and we talked about various things. This one didn't actually come up, but my perspective, I think I'll share with you 100%. Low code tools to me is always just a bad smell. Like, I think the vendor was the productivity that would enable. That's not a bad motivation. You've got someone who's not very technical, that can't deal with deployment problems, with operational change management problems, with the sort of, maintaining something for the long term. So, the solution that I just totally disagree with, putting code, low code, somewhere in UI, locked in. I now think that with the products like us, or vendor, we develop, and with that ethos of being able to change the code with an AI that helps you change it, totally game changing. Like, people talk about the kind of SaaS apocalypse. Well, my view is the first ones that should go are these kind of low code tools, because they will not be necessary. And you can maybe extrapolate that to, UIs in general. That might be going too far. Yeah, I think that's just such a cool observation. I wonder then what you think the steps might look like for the industry to change to more engineering, because a lot of people don't think like engineers.
Follow the money. We need to offer some sort of reward for making that happen. The value that the engineer should produce should outpay whatever it costs. Otherwise, these other low-code tools or shortcuts, perhaps, they might continue to prolific.
And maybe that'll happen naturally. Maybe careers, employment, maybe vendors not being able to sign new deals because there's a better way. And maybe that will play out naturally. Okay, so we're coming to the final part of the show, and this is where it gets a little bit interesting. We've got this idea that we can ask each guest to come up with a question for the next guest. So Kevin, in our last recording, has come up with a question for you, and you'll get the chance to ask the next guest a question. The idea being that we can share, and challenge and get people to think. So The question Kevin had for you, which you've not heard before, is there a belief that you had 3 years ago about your data work that you now believe to be fundamentally wrong or not true? And what caused you to change that belief?
Interesting question. So I think within data engineering, the bread and butter within data was displaying that data and telling a story about it, like building beautiful dashboards for the executives to take excellent decisions that would drive revenue up to the sky.
Mm-hmm.
So I always thought dashboards were bread and butter with data engineering. But what I'm seeing now with agents, and perhaps we're not there quite yet, is that dashboards will be a thing from the past. Not all of them, but most, I would say. If you think about it, a dashboard is something relatively static. It's something that tells you what happened. But you're assuming that an executive or someone had the time, effort, and concentration to actually apply filters, see what's happening, and then say, okay, this is what happened. But with agents, we can go not one, but 2 steps forward, I believe. So the agent doesn't need to look at dashboard. It can look at the summarized data. You can identify dips and peaks. We are seeing that already, with monitoring alerts. But with agents, you will be able to identify that and then go and dig in further. Go and look at the granular data to understand not only what happened, but why it happened. Once it has a nice understanding of why it happened, you can even one step further and say, okay, what can we do to fix this or to prevent it in future cases by looking at other sources of data or other things. So in a similar way of software engineers, we don't really look at the logs every time to debug things as we used to, like my line. We throw that into the agent, give us a summary, best bet on what you think this error is about. I think the agents will become more like replacing a dashboard for a notification and saying, look, this is what happened, this is why it happened, and these are my suggestions, actions for you to take. Or do you want me to do it actually?
Much more narrative. I love talking about dashboards. I don't definitely not a fan of building them, or the kind of probably one of many people who think it's a kind of mossy way of looking at the world. As you're sort of talking that through, I really got my mind racing. Actually, if you think about a pilot flying a plane or someone driving a car, well, they have a gauge. They have a kind of defined and decided metric that governs some of their activities. But it's fundamentally a very poor reflection of what's going on. And, if that gauge is broken, it could cause serious issues. Yeah, so as you're talking that through, that definitely brought to life for me the dashboard as a gauge. It's just a very poor representation. But if you could comprehend all the things going on, you wouldn't actually even need the gauge. You don't have I'm thinking like a base jumper or, a kind of wingsuit. It doesn't have a gauge. They feel how it's flying. And there's a lot more, input and able to really fly their organization. That's a pretty cool vision for the future. You've inspired in my mind, at least.
Absolutely, yeah.
Coming to your question then. So the next guest, another data leader, what would you ask them given the chance?
I have a spicy one for the next guest. We're in a economic turmoil at the moment. If you were asked to reduce your cloud costs by half to allow the company to survive 3 months, 6 months more, what would you shut down and why?
Interesting. I love asking this question. Yeah. Any particular reason it's cloud cost and not cost?
Well, within the engineering, mostly we do things in the cloud, but whatever is in these data leaders' realm, whether that is cloud or something else.
The reason I ask is it's often employees at the highest cost, far in excess of the cloud. So I'm going to lead the witness. I'm going to ask you a question. You're really, really awesome, and thanks for coming onto the show. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Absolutely, the pleasure was mine. Thanks so much for having me around here.
Cool, great success. Cheers, mate. Very good.